Oh no! Oh, we were doing so well.
We were doing great, and I went to make sure I was plugged in, or no, I went to make sure my mic was turned on, and I accidentally unplugged it.
Nice job.
Yeah, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, but now it's live at 5. So that was awful. I'm never saying that again
Oh,
ever.
okay.
Jake's like, oh,
Okay.
goodness. Jake's like, that was so bad. Never use that again. Gotta get a little refresher here real quick. Got some caffeine in me. You know. I'm gonna cover my microphone so no one hears me drink.
Anyway,
Little
we're here.
ASMR action for you, apparently. Brought to you by Celsius. Just kidding. They didn't sponsor that. I'm just drinking a Celsius. Once again, went with my classic sparkling peach vibe. About the only one I drink. It's pretty delish. Go check it out. But before you check that out, we got some guitars to talk about. So today's Live at 5 is the second episode of our themed episode kind of thing. That was very lackluster. Just kind of was like, woo. Went here, went there real quick.
Yep.
Yeah. Woo. So, every episode from here on out, we're going to have a special themed episode. Last week, we talked about all the custom shop Stratocasters that we have in shop. Well, not all of them. I couldn't fit them all up here. Today, we're going to answer the age-old question, why does this guitar cost $400 and why does that guitar cost $4,000? Because we hear it all the time.
Yeah.
And if you're looking for your very first guitar, or you might have a guitar and you're looking to upgrade, you might find yourself in that position of wondering, the guitar that I currently own was $400, but it looks very similar to that one. Why the big differences? And I'm going to do my best to explain that to you. It's a little hard over a live stream video camera type setup because ideally I would be putting a guitar in your hands. You would play the guitar through an amp. You would hear how a ceramic magnet pickup sounds different from an Alnico magnet pickup. You would feel the difference in a poplar body from an alder body. You would feel the difference between rolled edges on a fretboard and a flat sawn, nothing special about it fretboard. And that is the best way to show you how all that breaks down and adds up to the different prices. Differences in hardware. You get things that are die cast, you get things that are chrome and nickel plated, you get things that, tuners that operate on a 12-to-1 tuning ratio, which tells you how many rotations or how many turns of the gear in one rotation to tuners that have an 18-to-1 ratio. And those affect tuning stability. You get things like a synthetic nut on the top of the guitar to a bone nut on the top of the guitar. Those affect tone. Those affect tuning stability. When we get into the custom shop, we're going to talk about quarter sawn maple. So we talk about that a lot. Every time we highlight a Fender custom shop guitar, we're like, this has a quarter sawn maple neck. What does that mean? We're going to explain that today too. So all kinds of variances, all kinds of things we'll get into. You'll notice as we start with the Squires or move our way up to the custom shop that branding within the Fender lines also changes. You go from having something called Fender Designed to Fender Pure Vintage. You go to the Fender Custom Shop, to Fender Custom Shop Hand Wound. And in the middle there, you kind of lose a little bit of identity with certain pickups, but it picks back up. When you get back in, picks back up. Get it? See what I did there? When you get back into the player series, you start getting things like the player noiseless pickups, not just Fender design pickups. So we're going to work our way up.
Moving on up.
We're starting, moving on up. And now our stream was taken off the air. So we're starting.
That wasn't long enough.
Yeah. I don't know, back to back? No, still short enough. So we're going to start at the bottom, and the very bottom. $200. $200 gets you this next guitar. We showcased it earlier this week on a reel that we posted on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. This is the Squier Sonic. Gorgeous guitar. California blue, ceramic pickups, simple control, volume, tone, 3-position knob, C-shaped neck and a 9.5-inch radius. This is a poplar body, maple neck, die-cast tuners. It's very lightweight. Part of that is because it's poplar. Part of it is because the neck is very thin. It is maple, but it's not a great quality maple. Ceramic pickups are going to be bright and harsh. There's not a lot of control to them. So if you're like that, go for it. But this is where it starts. Squier by Fender, Telecaster, but you'll notice when you get your hands on it and once you start playing around with it, looks great, feels great. A much better guitar than when Squier was messing with the Affinity series, if you all remember those. These hold up very well. These are great guitars. You could get this guitar for $200, add a set of tuners to it, maybe upgrade the pickups if you wanted to, but really upgrade the tuners, the nut, put some lock straps on it and take it to a gig. You're good to go. It would be a phenomenal guitar for that. But yeah, $200. Also just look at and this is not trying to knock Squier or Fender or anything, but just look at how basic the guitar is. We're talking entry-level appointments across the board. Nothing fancy, nothing flashy, nothing stands out. The Squier Sonic. Then from the Squier Sonic, we move up to the Classic Vibes. This is another one we've talked about before. I'm slowly but surely talking myself down from buying it. But the Classic Vibes is your entry point to a reissue guitar. Whether it's Classic Vibe, Vintera, or the American Vintage 2, and then essentially the custom shop. Fender does a great job of keeping their history around. You can take a guitar like this, and this is a 60s style Tele. It has a 60s style C-shaped neck at a 9.5-inch radius. This one, however, until you start getting into the higher quality things, uses a bone nut. Almost all Fenders use synthetic bone. This one uses using a real bone nut. Poplar body, maple neck, nickel-plated hardware, and you can see it has the humbucker in the neck position. These pickups, though, even though we're stepping up a level in guitars, are still considered Fender design pickups. When you move up in here, you're noticing much nicer job on the paint job. The neck is a much nicer quality neck, and it's just overall a better built, well-constructed guitar. It has the vintage style tuners. I did some digging on those, and I actually couldn't find a solid answer as to whether or not the vintage styles were just die cast or they're nickel plated. I believe that they are nickel plated, but as far as that's all I could find. I couldn't find much else information on them. I couldn't find the gear ratio because these are not the Fender vintage style. They're just considered vintage style. It's the stuff you would find on all your Classic Vibe series guitars from Squier. Yeah, these put you more in that high 300s, 400s type price range. We're going to go from the Classic Vibe over to the Player series. This was another one from the video series this week where he talked about, moving up on the product line from Fender.
Hold it in.
The what?
Trying to hold it in. Moving on up.
This is the butterscotch finish from the Player Series Telecaster. When you start moving up in here, you're going to notice what we refer to as the skunk stripe in the back of the neck. It's a little bit more durability and construction when it comes to getting that truss rod in place and all that, especially when it comes to a maple neck because no fretboard, right? It's just it's a maple neck, so that's how that gets set in there. Access point is on the top. This is when you start noticing the brand identity taking place because you no longer have Fender design pickups. You have what's called Player Alnico pickups. So that identifies the pickups to go with the brand of the guitar. You have the Alnico magnets. Let's see here. Otherwise, it's standard die-cast sealed tuners, synthetic bone, C-shape at a 9.5-inch radius, alder body maple neck. That's about as standard as it gets when it comes to buying a Telecaster. Player Series guitar, butterscotch blonde, gorgeous all the way around, feels good. Some Teles, they have some monstrous weight to them, but this isn't bad. This is a good size right here. Butterscotch blonde Player Series Telecaster. And then, very recently, I'd say in the last couple years, Fender came out with the Player Plus. And no joke, I'm not gonna, I can't even hide it. When they first came out, I'm not gonna lie, I had an issue with the fact that Fender was like, oh, this is a made in Mexico guitar and it's gonna cost $1,200. Didn't sit well with me. I didn't think anyone would go for it. Then I got my hands on one. And it's not just a guitar with better pickups. It's got nicer paint jobs, the hardware is upgraded. If you notice, the pickups have a different resemblance to them. They come with locking tuners. That's where the upgraded hardware comes to play. Locking tuners, rolled edges on the fretboard to give you all types of comfortability while you're playing for a longer amount of time. What's really cool about these is these are the player noiseless pickups. Noiseless pickups tend to use Alnico magnets, but it's a single coil guitar that you can plug into an amp and be virtually noiseless the whole time you're playing. Phenomenal guitars. Nice, brilliant craftsmanship as it steps up from that quality from the Player series. This is an excellent way to bridge that gap between a guitar that was built in Mexico and a guitar that was built in the United States. The Player Plus. Let's see here. What was the little tag on the... Yep, noiseless pickups, rolled. And then they have a push knob that adds the neck position no matter what position you're in on the guitar. And whether, I know I only have good electric guitars up here, but the quality and everything I'm talking about also applies to basses. So if you were to pick up that same series, the Player Plus series bass, it would, all these traits, qualities, appointments, everything I'm talking about would also relay over to the Player series as well. So moving on from the Player series, we're going to get into Vintera. The Vintera is the second line in guitars in which we're going to start getting into these vintage reissue type specs. This is a 60s style Strat. I forget what this finish was called, like copper or something like that. Maple neck, alder body, 60s C-shaped style on the neck. And here's where it's really cool, because when you start getting into these vintage reissue type guitars, instead of a 9.5 inch radius or a compound radius, we're operating on a 7.25 radius, which is like the vintage specs from how they built all these guitars, especially back in the 60s. We're going back to a synthetic style bone and bone nut, and then we're getting into the vintage style tuners, which for the most part come on pretty much anything vintage that Fender makes. I don't think I had anything else. The pickups are, yep, 60s vintage style pickups. So you're going to get that nice tone from the 60s. Really cool. But what's different between this and the classic vibe behind me is that this is where, oh, I almost lost my balance there. This is where Fender starts relicking guitars. I don't know if some of y'all remember years ago they did the Fender Road Worn series and the pawn shop guitars, and those are really cool. Those things looked like they got beat up, dragged behind the bus. Looks like they were just worn out and abused for years. Tons of play time on them, and they do that back here with the Vintera series. The only one I question is like there's these dots around the input jack. I'm like, who's hitting their guitar hard enough trying to plug in that you're like puncturing the body? But
well,
they started
they're
imitating.
probably doing it in the dark.
None of my guitars have them marked. There's a little bit of wearing and patina finish to the back of the neck. There's some marks across the body. They do a little bit of the whole checking in the paint finish. The back replicates some buckle rash and some scratches there. Not a ton. They don't go overboard on it, but it's enough to show you that they put in the thought and the effort to replicate a 60s style Stratocaster. And then it's also worth noting, in case we haven't caught on to it, or maybe at first I thought it would be an understood thing. The more we move up the line of guitars, the more labor intensive these become as well. So that's also influencing how the cost goes from $400 to $800 to $1,200 to $1,400, and then so on and so forth. That plays a part in this, because we are, as much as we would love to only be paying for the physical guitar itself, we are paying for the amount of labor and the time that went into constructing these guitars as well. Also, production costs and labor costs and materials, they all have a cost. It all adds up. And it's just part of all of that adding up and linking together. Fender has a series of guitars called the Performer, but I didn't have any of those in stock. Personal preference, the Performer is like the entry level to a USA built Fender. However, I would skip the Performer and just buy a Player Plus. That's just a personal preference. Just saying. It's kind of like buying one of those nice standard 60s Epiphone Les Pauls and not buying a Gibson Tribute. because they're just, even though it's an Epiphone, it's a way better guitar than the Tribute Series Gibson. Just for your consideration. Just, you know, you might be able to think, oh, I can buy a U.S. model guitar. But don't think of it as you just want a guitar from the United States. Think of it as you want a quality-built guitar. You can do that with the Player Plus series.
Yeah.
It's a much different guitar than the Performer series. So just keep that in mind. But what we do have in stock are the Professional 2s. I'd say right now the Pro 2 is probably considered Fender's like flagship guitar. Whether you're looking at a Strat, Tele, Jazzmaster, or a bass, jazz bass or Precision, I'd say these are the flagship model, the flagship brand from Fender. It's in a majority of their advertisements. You see them out on the circuit all the time with gigging artists, and we go through quite a few of them here as well. Like the few guitars we talked about before it, Alder Body. This one uses a bone nut, 9.5-inch radius, a deep C shape on the neck. It has Fender standard hardware, so we're moving away from just calling things die cast or sealed. This is branded as Fender standard hardware, everything from the bridge to the tuning machines up top. These have the push knob, which adds that neck pickup into whatever position you're in. The pickups here are they are the vintage modified 2 pickups. So this is where you start moving into, again, that branding increases and the level of branding improves as we're moving up the line of Fender. Not that they don't believe in the other stuff, because remember, even if you buy these Squires, they still say Squire by Fender. They don't just say Squire. Fender's name is still on there. These guitars just start increasing their own image, their own likability. And by doing so, it allows them to become that flagship model guitar that Fender's known for. If you are looking for a high-quality Strat and you want it to be the workhorse, it is your smoking gun. It is the thing you take with you everywhere you go. The Pro 2 series is what you want to look at. Quality craftsmanship, phenomenal finish work, great sounding electronics. The Pro 2 is where you want to go if you're looking for that Fender guitar that's going to do everything for you. Then, moving on from there, we move into this third iteration, technically the last as far as vintage and reissue goes before we reach custom shop. I'm all turned around. I was like, I don't want to put them in order because that looks boring, and then I turn around and I can't find it. This is the American Vintage 2 1966 Jazzmaster. The Jazzmaster, when it first debuted, was supposed to be this all-knowing guitar. You could do everything with it. And, well, you can. You can really do anything you want with a Jazzmaster. The only people it didn't catch on with was the jazz players. Explain that one to me.
Well, as you can see,
it looks like you can play some serious jazz.
one way to find out.
Yeah. But here's where we're going to get into the finer details of it all. Notice right behind me here in the Vintera, pretty standard-looking guitar. You have your cream dot inlays, the mint green pickguard, cream parchment style plastics. But outside of that, there's nothing else on there that says this was a vintage style, this is a reissue. When you move into the Jazzmaster 66 reissue, we're getting a double bound, or the neck has the binding on both sides, which is very standard to that time period. We're getting the block inlays with the specific materials that they used. The finish is a 3-color finish, but it's not in your face. It's not real vibrant. It's not real, like, stand out and popping out at you. This uses the American Vintage 2 66 Jazzmaster pickups, C-shaped neck profile, and then you start looking up at the headstock, and it's going to be a more vintage era when it comes to the name on the headstock and everything as well. They use vintage style hardware, replicating everything down to the bare exact replica of what they were before, and we're getting back into that 7 1/4 radius along the neck as it was from the 60s. But yeah, the 66 American Vintage 2 reissue. Now, part of that also goes into these things is where a lot in this industry nowadays tends to be computerized, mass production, all that kind of stuff. You also have to think, how many American Pro 2s are they making in relation to the vintage 2s? And so I had a certain guitar company explain this to me a few years ago. They didn't do a ton of left-handed models. And part of that was because anytime they wanted to do a run of left-handed guitars, they would have to stop production on the right-handed guitars, remove all the jigs, flip them over, put them back in, and then specifically do a run of left-handed guitars. But by the time that run was over, then their back orders of all the right-handed guitars just continued to climb and climb and be so far behind that they would just have to swap it all back over, catch back up, and then just not do left-handeds. Things like that, I imagine, would be very similar if you're moving from something like a professional 2 series to an American Vintage 2. The production numbers are probably very different, and there's a little bit more quality and craftsmanship that goes into these guitars. Think of Fender, for the most part, is dot inlays. You start getting into block inlays and different radiuses, different neck profiles, different electronics. Those are these labor costs we're talking about that affect how some of these things cost. So just keep all that in mind. We got 2 more guitars here for you. Doing all right on time. This next one here is the Fender American Ultra. Also a Jazzmaster. This one comes in cobalt blue. They went ahead and they did the binding on the neck on this one. This has the American Ultra noiseless pickups. And yeah, if you look and just immediately looking at it, you can tell this paint costs more. The Perloy pickguard, what's that, 4-ply? The shadow's throwing it off. It was either 3 or 4-ply on the pickguard. Binding on the neck. And then also putting the side markers in that same binding. Locking tuners. The carved heel. They carved the heel out on the Ultras. Give you higher access points and everything. So again, we're climbing up that ladder. We're seeing much finer, nicer appointments. More hands-on, labor-intensive on the guitar. And this is what sets it apart. I guarantee you, if you were to come in, hold this guitar, and then hold the $200 Telecaster behind me, night and day, you would notice a difference. That might be hard to tell from the cameras, but I mean, just looking at them both right there, if you can see both, I think you can. Shockingly different. All still Fender brand, everything on point with the brand, but very much their own things, and very much different when it comes to a deciding factor of setting them apart and figuring out what is what. Let's see. And then the last guitar for the day. Last week we talked about all the custom shop Strats that we had in stock, and we didn't talk about any of the Telecasters, which is fine. Last week's episode was specifically about Strats. This one is about moving up from Squier to custom shop. We don't have to go from Squier to custom shop. As we've discussed, you have options. You don't have to go from spending $400 to spending $6,000. You can spend $800, you spend $1,400, $26. You can find a guitar you like at any price point with Fender. It's really cool. But this here is the 65 Telecaster Heavy Relic, and there are definitely some features on here that are going to set it apart immediately. The amount of relicing that's done to it. That's not something you're just going to throw around, right? This is someone who meticulously crafted all this wear and tear. They crafted the fading from the finish to the raw wood underneath. They did the double binding across the whole body. They wore down the buckle rash and the edges. They wore down the neck. They reliced the hardware so that it looks age-specific from that time period. The bobbins inside the pickup, everything. But here's what I was really excited to get into that we've never really discussed before. We always talk about it, but we don't really discuss it too much. Quarter sawn maple. We talk about it in every show. We have a custom shop guitar, and we get to a point where I just say it every show, but we never really talk about it. We don't say, oh, it's a quarter sawn maple, and here's what it is. So part of getting into why some of these guitars cost so much and why the prices escalate, but are still very much worth it, I thought now would be a great time to get into why quarter sawn maple, into what quarter sawn maple is. A majority of guitars, so we're going to think of a tree laying down, and you, the viewer, are looking at the base of the trunk head on. You see the wood grain. You see the rings of life for the tree just spreading out and filling everything around. Well, if you were to take those wood grains and go horizontally across the tree from the bottom, that's called flat sawn. And when that gets cut, and then applied to the neck of a guitar, think of it as your fingerboard on the guitar is now running parallel with all the lines that have come from that log that you've cut down. Nothing wrong with that. I'd say a majority of the guitars in the world are built with flat sawn necks. However, instead of cutting horizontally across, if we move up and cut vertically down from the sides, you get what's called quarter sawn. Quarter sawn necks offer more stability. They run perpendicular with your board, so then that way, when you're running the fingerboard down the guitar, it runs the entire length of the fingerboard. That stability stays the same all the way across. However, here's the downside to it. It is more labor intensive to cut quarter sawn wood than flat sawn. Because it is more labor intensive, not as many sawmills do it. It also produces just a little bit more waste than flat sawing, flat sawing. We'll call it that. Produces a little bit more waste than flat sawing would. So not everyone offers it. This is a custom shop specific thing when you get to the quarter sawn. And when I said it increases the stability of everything, it's less likely to be affected by your wear and tear, shrinking, swelling, anything like that. They hold up very well. You get a brilliant tuning stability from everything, and it just looks cool. If you come in to the shop next time, ask to see one of our custom shops, and we'll show you on the headstock because you can very clearly see the perpendicular lines that run straight through the neck. And that's an explanation of just a couple of the things that would cause a custom shop to cost a little bit more, because like I said, the cost on a quarter sawn neck is a little bit higher. They are more labor intensive, but it adds such a nice tuning stability to the guitar, durability to your tone. Holds up very well. Yeah, and this is your Fender custom shop. Most of the custom shops are handmade. That's a whole nother episode to get into when you want to start talking about the differences between like artisan series, the master builders, and all. That's a whole nother thing to get into. We do not have time for that today. I'm actually out of time right now. It looks like I'm coming up on 5:30.
Yep.
So normally I would run back and go through everything, but I'm running out of time. Just remember that no matter where you want to go with Fender, there's always a guitar to find. Whether you're starting in the Squire series, moving into the Standard or the Player series, they've called Standards for so long. They're the Player series.
It's been a while though.
Yeah. So you're starting from the Squire. You can go with the Sonic or the Classic vibe. You can move into the Player series and just the guitars that come out of Mexico in general. From the Mexico factory, you're looking at Player, Player Plus, Vintera, and then a handful of the signature models come out of the Mexico factory. Then you can start moving into the United States built stuff, all out of California. You start getting into your Performer series, your Pro 2s, your American Vintage 2s, your custom shops. There are other artist models that are made in the U.S. as well. And then another time we can get into things like their ukuleles, the acoustics, the Acoustasonics, amplifiers. There's literally anything we could get into with Fender. They're a great company, and it's cool when you have companies like that that have all those things that they can offer to get you out there. I think that about sums it up for today. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for hanging out. I'm Jack.
I'm Jake.
This was Live at 5. We'll see you next week. We talk about Ibanez.